Welcome to the Weekly Defence Podcast, the show about defence procurement and military technology. We are brought to you in partnership with our sponsor, Nammo. I'm your host, Helen Haxall, coming to you this week from a sunny West London. On the show this week, we speak to a former commandant of the French Foreign Legion about his vision of the future battle space. I sit down with our Asia-Pacific editor, Gordon Arthur, on the current socio-political issues in Hong Kong and Beijing's assets. But first, our weekly news roundup, and I'm joined by our editor-in-chief and C editor, Richard Thomas.
Hi, Helen.
And our deputy land editor, Beth Maundrell.
Hi, Helen.
To talk about what's caught their eye this week. Richard, could we start with the sea domain, please?
We absolutely can. I wanted to talk submarines today, but obviously have to begin with the recent news of the death of 14 submariners on board a Russian submarine. Russian government officials have said that the personnel died as a result, of toxic inhalation following a fire on board. The boat has returned to Severomorsk. Exact mission details are classified, obviously, but it's possible that the vessel and the crew could have been monitoring underwater communication cables, but that's a bit speculative, I guess. Really, though, I guess it points to the dangers that all submariners face. Other examples include the San Juan and the Kursk, and the realization that when something goes wrong and you're hundreds or thousands of feet underneath the surface of the ocean, there's very little chance of being rescued. But anyway, on to the news, and this story from Alexander Mladenov and Krasimir Grozev. So Russia has announced that it's placed orders for 2 Yasen-class nuclear-powered submarines and 2 Lada-class diesel-electric submarines to boost its subsurface fleet.
So what does that mean for Moscow?
It's part of an ongoing program that Russia is pursuing as it looks to see how its navy can stay relevant as military and political power shifts again to a multipolar world. Obviously, they have to make decisions as to where its investment will go, and it looks like, again, it's chosen to invest in its subsurface fleet as its surface fleet is struggling with maintenance and obsolescence issues. Many of those platforms that it has hark back to the latter days of the Cold War. But I think Russia's decision to focus on its submarines is valid. In my view, it's still in the global top 3 of submarine designers in the world.
But do we have any program dates, deadlines, timelines? How long has this been going on for?
So specifically regarding the announcements for the 2 SSNs and the 2 SSKs, there are no dates or contract values. These programs will be tacked onto ongoing construction of nuclear-powered and conventionally powered submarines that the Russian Navy is pursuing. Yep. Just quickly onto China and its submarine force. This is from Gordon Arthur in Hong Kong, as you just mentioned, Helen. More about what's going on in that restive part of the world a little bit later in the podcast. So the US has credited, just as a background, the US has credited the People's Liberation Army Navy, the plan, with currently having 6 SSBNs, ballistic missile submarines, 6 SSNs, and up to 50 SSKs. So that's a pretty sizable and capable force. You're looking at 60-plus submarines there.
Doesn't that make them one of the largest submarine forces in the world, no?
It certainly does. You've put me on the spot. I'm going to say it makes them the...
second or third?
Oh, could even be the largest in terms of numbers.
Yeah.
So Gordon's story, very interesting, obviously providing the details about the facts and the figures behind the size of the plan, but also he's gone into how China developed the know-how in order for it to go back and create its own indigenous programs. So he's looked at a CRS report from 2018 that sheds some light on the suspected methods that China used to acquire this knowledge. And this report states that some of the new indigenous-built designs are believed to have benefited from Russian submarine technology and design know-how from scientists who worked at the Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico and the Lawrence Livermore National Lab in California before moving back to China. Academics in Gordon's piece state that the next steps that they think China will make will be to increase the size of its nuclear attack fleet, which will provide greater range and endurance for the plan as it pushes into the Indian Ocean. It's already been there, of course, and pushes into the Central Pacific and even possibly the Eastern Pacific, quite close to the US.
Over to the air side. Anniversaries and birthdays have been aplenty in recent years. We had the Royal Air Force's 100th last year. NATO celebrated this year its 70th anniversary. And there's also the forthcoming celebration of the 50th anniversary of the historic moon landing. And I'm sure Shephard has a birthday in a few years' time for its 40th. But anyway, news from our Asia Pacific editor, Gordon Arthur, is that the Philippine Air Force is about to blow out 72 candles to celebrate itself. And its commanding general recently used the formal occasion to highlight new platforms that the force is expecting in the coming year or so. Now, due this month is a C-295 aircraft. Airbus Defence and Space was awarded this US dollar $32.5 million contract in Q4 of last year. It's outfitted as a C-2 aircraft, and the Air Force already has 3 C-295s in service. The final one of those was delivered in February 2016. In a similar vein, under its Command and Control Jet Aircraft programme, the Air Force will also receive a single Gulfstream G280 next year. Now, this is going to be used for VVIP use by the President and other national leaders in times of crisis. Now, this aircraft particularly will be replacing a Fokker F-28 currently used within this role. Due in Q4 of 2019 is a second-hand C-130 Hercules. This is going to be used for air mobility, and it's being procured with assistance from the US. Now, the Air Force has been talking about this refurbished transport aircraft since 2018. The service is also seeking help from the US to repair a C-130H that caught fire just before takeoff in March. The Air Force has also on order 6 A-29 Super Tucano close air support aircraft. These are from Embraer under the Horizon 1 modernisation plan. And according to the original contract signed in November 2017, these should start arriving in the Philippines in November, with final delivery expected by February 2020.
Helen, that's an awful lot of fixed-wing platforms that you've talked about there, but if I remember correctly, and my memory's a bit hazy these days, there was something last year about some rotary wing program that the Philippines pulled out from, right?
You're quite correct, Richard. So context to the helicopter acquisition side is the Air Force has had to refocus its attention, you're quite right, in relation to 16 combat utility helicopters after the nation's president, in a state of fury against the Canadian government, cancelled a contract for Bell 412 EPIs in February last year. I believe that's what you're referring to. So new helicopters are an important part of the Air Force's acquisitions, and the Commanding General used its birthday celebrations to confirm that the first of 16 combat utility helicopters will start arriving in country in 2020. Now, these are assumed to be Sikorsky S-70I Black Hawks, which, as we expect, will be built in Poland, and the contract is rumoured to be worth US dollars $239 million. And last point from me, the first 10 Black Hawks will be delivered in batches next year, with the remaining 6 scheduled for 2021. Now, with all this news in the skies, let's go to safer ground, or maybe not. Beth, over to you, land domain.
Yeah, thanks, guys. So obviously really great to hear from all corners of the world today, and I'm bringing it back to Europe, specifically the UK, where Rheinmetall and BAE Systems this week launched its new independent UK-based joint venture for military vehicle design, manufacture and support. Now, the joint venture will be known as Rheinmetall BAE Systems Land and will be headquartered in Telford in the West Midlands of the UK. So RBSL will play a major role in manufacturing the Boxer 8x8 for the British Army under the Mechanised Infantry Vehicle Programme, and on their promotional material with the new RBSL logo in the background, they had a Dutch Boxer drive past the new factory site in Telford. And they'll also provide support to the British Army's in-service bridging and armoured vehicle fleets. But this is kind of raised the question of what's next for the British Army's main battle tank, the Challenger 2, under its life extension programme. Why is this brought this programme to the forefront once again? And it's because BAE Systems and Rheinmetall were separately bidding for the programme, and they were the only two bidders. So the question is, now they're under this joint venture, what does it mean? But to go into what they were actually offering, BAE Systems has already showcased what it called its Black Knight Challenger 2 for the Life Extension Programme. That included new night vision systems, protection systems, thermal imaging, but it did not include a new gun. And this is because it was understood that the MOD did not have that requirement. Now, Rheinmetall, while it has not shown off a full vehicle concept in public anyway, it has detailed some of its proposals for the Life Extension Programme, which includes new sights, new turrets, and importantly, a German-made smoothbore 125mm gun. So the two offerings are quite different, and BAE told me that they're essentially just waiting for a decision from the MOD for the next phase of the programme, and kind of signified that both Rheinmetall and BAE Systems have good skills in this area. But themselves and the MOD have not confirmed whether it could lead to one proposal, which kind of would make sense from my eyes. If the MOD are turning to look at this German-made smoothbore 120mm, you could take the know-how from BAE Systems, as they are the OEM of the Challenger 2, and Rheinmetall's gun, put them together and have one solution.
So to rip off a line from the Spice Girls, does it mean that two will become one?
Well, we don't know, essentially. At the moment, everyone seems to be just waiting for the MOD to make up their minds. I asked them whether it could be a single source procurement in the end, and the official line from the MOD is the MOD still has the ability to compete in service support and would not award contracts on unfavourable terms to itself. So read into that what you will. If they did do that, where it did become one solution, they might have to go into a second phase of assessment and evaluation. Regarding timelines, though, there's not a lot of time left to kind of make these decisions. With according to the MOD, a main gate decision expected in 2021, and upgraded Challenger 2s expected to enter service into 2025.
Yeah, no, just a quick point, I guess, it isn't a question, just a statement. I think it's interesting for me as well that what this does for BAE Systems armoured vehicles manufacturing ability. It looks like they've decided to become a junior partner in this joint venture. And as we know, a Rheinmetall official will take the top spot, so interesting.
Yeah, I think Rheinmetall are really seizing every opportunity they can when it comes to expanding their footprint across Europe and across the armoured vehicle manufacturing market.
Yep.
For more on these stories, and if you wish to spice up your life, please do visit our website, shepherdmedia.com. Coming up on the podcast, we sit down with General Alain Boucan, a strategic advisor to Thales, to talk AI, cyber attack, and his concept of collaborative combat. But first, I speak with Gordon Arthur about China's Hong Kong Garrison and the military equipment on display at a recent base open day. We wanted to take time out from the podcast to tell you about a more recent addition to Shepherd Media. Our new series of market forecasts enables you to understand both the broader competitive landscape and finer details of various sectors of the defence industry. Each one identifies the demand for platforms, programmes and equipment in each sector and across each region. We have gathered this information together into a large database, and from that we have compiled the reports, which project our view of the equipment and procurement market over the next 10 years. To date, we have produced market forecasts on the armoured vehicles and naval vessels markets. We have just released our military unmanned systems market forecast. And later in the year, we plan to release 10-year forecasts on the military aircraft and artillery and air defence markets. To find out more, please email subs@shephardmedia.com or visit our website. We are now turning our attention to Hong Kong, where over the past several weeks we have seen mass protests over a controversial extradition bill. This culminated this week when a group of activists broke into Hong Kong's Legislative Council building for several hours, and hundreds of police used tear gas to disperse demonstrators. On the line is our man on the ground, Gordon Arthur, Shephard Media's Asia Pacific editor, who has lived in Hong Kong for many years and who recently gained insight into the Chinese military presence on the former British colony. Good morning, Gordon.
Morning, Helen. How are you?
Very well. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So, to kick things off, the Hong Kong Garrison of the People's Liberation Army, Gordon, recently opened the gates of 3 of its military camps to members of the public. Firstly, were you able to join them?
I was, yeah. This happened just this past weekend, so I was able to attend. It's something that they do every year.
Oh, okay, so it's an annual event.
Correct.
So before we look at the equipment on display, could you just tell us about the Hong Kong Garrison itself? What's its purpose?
Well, of course, Hong Kong was handed back from the UK to China in 1997. So as part of that process, China took up responsibility for defending, protecting Hong Kong. So on 1st of July, which was the actual handover date, troops of the PLA moved into Hong Kong, and they've been there ever since. They have a pretty low visibility. You don't see them very often unless you actually go and look at their camps, from the outside, of course. But they are there. And it's sort of a bit of a mysterious and secretive organisation. You could ask the Hong Kong government, you could ask the PLA itself, how big is the garrison here? And no one would really tell you. But from what I've been able to work out, it's essentially a brigade-size force. So it combines Army, Air Force and Navy components and under a single command. So possibly 3 motorised infantry battalions, an armoured infantry battalion with APCs, an engineer and chemical battalion, a special forces battalion, an air defence battalion, and a motor transport company. And of course, they have a helicopter detachment, no fixed-wing aircraft, and also a naval detachment as well.
Could you hazard a guess at how many members or how many personnel they might have?
I mean, I've looked into this, and I would speculate around 6,000 troops in all. Now, not all of them may be in Hong Kong at the same time because they're supported by a base across the border in mainland China in Shenzhen. But let's say around about 6,000 for a brigade-sized force.
And what about the garrison's military capability? What did you take from that visit?
Well, I think it was very interesting that the garrison proceeded with the open day. You know, you mentioned the unrest that's been going on, and that's not improving any. Just about 10 days ago, there was between 1 and 2 million Hong Kong people marching on the streets. So one would have thought PLA might want to take a lower profile and not run this annual event. But no, it did. And of course, we went along to find out more. Now, one thing that I can add, overnight, there were rumors on social media in Hong Kong that the Hong Kong government was going to call in the PLA to help quell some of the protests and things that have been going on. And so the Hong Kong government was very quick to issue a press release saying that no, it wasn't going to call in the PLA, which is a bit of a relief. But the PLA under Hong Kong law is not allowed to intervene in such civil disturbances unless the situation reaches such a stage where the Hong Kong police can't handle it anymore.
I mean, I'm quite amazed, like you said there, that they still allowed this kind of visit for yourselves to go forward. I mean, who are the types of people that also were looking around with you or on the visit?
I mean, there were thousands of people there.
Wow.
They all had to get tickets or have a special invitation to do so. But the interesting thing is the PLA likes to say that this is an open event for Hong Kong citizens.
Yeah.
But when you go there, you actually find the majority of the people actually speaking Mandarin rather than Cantonese, which seems to suggest to me that either Hong Kong people are not interested or that Chinese people get more invitations than Hong Kong people do to actually visit the camp. So there's a high proportion of people who are from China, or perhaps they are migrants from China who are living in Hong Kong. Of course, there are a number of Hong Kong people there as well, and it does attract attention. Incidentally, just last week, the PLA actually did a special one-off exercise designed to practice and rehearse how it would intervene in an emergency situation in Hong Kong. And again, this was a little bit provocative because you would think at this time the PLA would want to keep a low profile. So some are seeing this as a show of force. The PLA wanted to show that it does have the ability to intervene and to back up the Hong Kong police if necessary.
Well, that's going to be my next question, Gordon. I mean, if civil unrest did boil over in Hong Kong and the PLA is called in to assist, what such vehicles would be a key asset?
Well, I think one of the main ones, we did see a demo at one of the bases over the weekend, would be what is called a Type 92B, which is a 6x6 armoured personnel carrier. So that's the heaviest vehicle that the PLA has in Hong Kong. A number of these are fitted with dozer blades, so just the perfect instrument to remove barricades that protesters could have put up on the streets. But this is sort of this would be a far-fetched situation, and one would hope that the PLA never is called upon to do such a thing. We all know what happened at Tiananmen Square. Of course, we don't expect that would happen in Hong Kong, but it would be a PR disaster to see the PLA intervening in such things in Hong Kong. The Garrison also has a number of 4x4 sort of protected mobility vehicles that they could also use, and of course just soldiers and trucks, and soldiers carrying guns would be enough to send most people home, I would say. It was interesting that a couple of the bases during the open days, there were patrols circling the perimeter. So these soldiers were armed with riot shields and pepper spray. So they were pretty much ready for anything.
Is this something that, compared with other times you've gone, has it changed quite a lot, this visit?
No, a lot of it was the same. They tend to follow the same script every year, pretty much. So a lot of the same things were there. There was a couple of new additions. So, for example, the demonstration with the Type 92 vehicle was something I haven't seen, and I've been going along for the past 10 years or so. They also showed some NBC vehicles, which they haven't shown before. They also had a bit of a combat demonstration, sort of a hostage situation. So PLA Special Forces would fast rope from a helicopter and go in and rescue the victim. So, but that's something that they've done every year. So I think for me, the most obvious thing was just a higher alert level around the bases.
You've talked about
that was most obvious.
Air and land there, but I'm just thinking, what about the PLA Navy? Did they have vessels on show to the public?
Yeah, they had an open base at Stonecutters Naval Base, which is the PLA's facility here in Hong Kong was actually built by the British and taken over by the Chinese in 1997. So they had open days 2 days in a row there. And pretty much the naval contingent in Hong Kong is headed by 2 Type 56 corvettes. That's the best armed ships that they have here. They also have at least two medium landing ships. So that would be good for depositing troops and equipment on islands or on a coast around Hong Kong. And also have a couple of other transport ships, or perhaps transport boats would be more accurate, and a tug. So that's pretty much what the naval contingent has here. Sometimes we'll have visiting warships will pass through Hong Kong. For example, a couple of months ago, we had 2 destroyers pass through Hong Kong.
Gordon, what's your assessment of Chinese capabilities that are on hand if the tensions continue to rise and Beijing decides to impose tighter control?
Well, Beijing has been imposing tighter control, and that was one whole reason why there have been so many mass protests that Hong Kong has never seen since 1997. I mean, the fact that up to 2 million people, no one really knows the number for sure. It's impossible to count that high. The fact that so many people are out on the streets and so angry about what the government is trying to do and pushing through laws and bills and regulations and just putting more pressure on the press, putting more pressure on just society in general. I think it would be unlikely for the PLA to take to the streets. As I said, it would be a disaster for their image. I mean, the police still has other capabilities, such as water cannons, that they can bring onto the streets if the situations continue to stay out of hand. But yeah, they have the numbers, they have equipment. It's a very easy thing for China or for the PLA to send extra equipment across the border. It's interesting that during these disputes and protests and unease, there've been sort of the rumor mill has been very busy. And so people are showing photos of military equipment in China deploying and getting ready. But all of these are pretty much false. We haven't seen any new equipment arriving across the border. But I think it would be an easy matter for them to reinforce troops here if they had to. But as I say, an unlikely scenario.
No, and just on a personal level, from the West, we obviously have our interpretation, our media that's showing us what's happening with the civil unrest. But you've touched on it, but just what's the mood like within Hong Kong right now, Gordon? How are people feeling about these protests particularly and this possible backlash from China? Is there anything you can share with us further?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just something that's come up overnight. So 5 years ago in 2014, we had what we called the Umbrella Revolution. So at that point, people took to the streets. And this is pretty much a continuation of that. There is an age divide. I mean, a lot of the people who are protesting, and certainly the ones who stormed the LegCo building, they were younger, idealistic students. Often you find that the older are more pragmatic and they want to protect their business interests, and they're much more supportive of the government. So really, I'm not sure where it's going to go from here. Society is very divided. It's polarized. You're either for or against the government. And
it is that black and white.
Yeah, it is. But the fact is that I think more and more people are realizing the danger of what a communist regime is like. So there's a lot of nefarious activities going on by the Chinese government, just trying to control the way people think, the way people act. And Hong Kong is not used to that. It prefers to more freedoms. And so people are reacting to that.
Well, thank you very much, Gordon, for that insight. Really appreciate that detail that you've gone into.
My pleasure, Helen.
After almost 40 years in the defence publishing business here at Shephard Media, we have built up a strong and loyal audience across all sectors. Our content is trusted and consumed by key decision makers through multiple channels. One benefit of having such a dedicated audience base is our ability to offer a comprehensive range of message delivery options for the discerning advertiser. From brand awareness campaigns across a combination of print and digital media, through targeted email campaigns or show dailies, to a plethora of online opportunities, or even advertising opportunities within this podcast itself. If you'd like to learn more, please visit shepherdmedia.com/advertising to discover more about the many advertising options available.
So I'm here with General Alain Boucan, who's a strategic defence counsellor for Thales, also formerly the commander of the French Foreign Legion.
Years and years ago, yes.
And obviously over the course of your career, you've been steeped in land warfare kind of operational concepts, but also the technical requirements that kind of enable the way that the army does its business. So I really just wanted to talk to you about essentially what is land digitization, and the concept of collaborative combat. How is that changing with the technologies that we have available today?
Yes, digitization is... I prefer to talk about digital transformation. Digitization is something simple. You're just doing on a computer what you used to do with a pencil on the paper. Digital transformation is more than that. We're not only changing the way we're doing the things, but we are also changing the processes and the way we're conducting operations, because technology will provide us with new opportunities and the possibility to do things differently and more efficiently. Our main aim in this direction is to have a real collaborative combat in place in the French forces, in the French army. So what is collaborative combat? As a joke, I could say that in my mind, combat has always been collaborative. So is there really something new? Because, at war, we have to coordinate what infantry is doing with signals and artillery. It's not new to collaborate, to cooperate, to coordinate. What is new is that before, this coordination was relying on the capability of men to talk together. Where are you? What are you doing? Where can you apply fires? In the future, the systems will be able to talk together and to have this coordination, simple measures established together and proposed directly to the crews. So the processes of the collaboration can be in a part automated.
So can you give us some more detail on that? I mean, there's an element of AI, I guess, in that concept that some processes will be automated.
There is, of course, AI in that, because what is the purpose? It's not to change the tactics. The tactics will remain. It is to change, to have these tactics implemented in the systems. That means that the tactical rules you are applying on the ground are to be written in software so that both systems can have the same comportments, the same way of doing things as men would have.
As part of this, and you were talking about requirements, sort of the requirements being proposed and developed to sort of enable this. You mentioned the idea of four technical pillars that were going to help this collaborative combat. Could you just run us through what that means?
Yes, of course. If we want to have this collaborative combat really effective in our systems, we need to have four pre-requirements established, technical requirements. The first one is connectivity. Our systems have to exchange data together, not only the systems, not only the platforms, but part of the platforms. I mean the engine, the sensors, the weapons, the Googles must exchange data together. What we're aiming at is to have a real kind of an Internet of Things on the battlefield, an Internet of battle things that needs to have not only radio, but also satellite communications, Wi-Fi, 5G, and so on. The second pillar is to have big data analytics capabilities, because as you can see, many systems, platforms, sensors will be exchanging data together. That will produce a huge amount of data. Military data used to be analyzed by men. It won't be possible any longer. So we will need to have automated processes to analyze the data and to extract the useful information from the data, so that to be provided to the commanders, so that they can decide with the right evaluation of the situation. The third pillar is, of course, artificial intelligence, because if we want to automate many processes, we have to describe these processes in software, in computers. That means that the tactical rules, for example, have to be written into informatic languages and then done by the machines. It's very important because that means that we'll accept that some actions are automated and some actions are no longer decided by men, but are decided by the machines. What do we accept? We of course can accept this for logistics, communications, sensors, intelligence, but never for lethal missions. We will never accept that a machine will kill a man. So its own decision.
So there'd still be a man in the loop when a weapon is being deployed.
A man in the loop or a man on the loop,
Sure.
able to control what is done by the machine. And then the fourth pillar is, of course, cyber, because if we accept to have more connectivity, more intelligence, artificial intelligence, more big data analytics, all this has to be protected by cyber capabilities. And the main point with cyber capabilities is resilience. Resilience, it's not only protection, but it's much more than that. Resilience is the ability to carry on the mission when everything is going wrong.
I guess one thing that a lot of the reporters picked up on was your comments about offensive cyber capabilities as part of that. If your adversary is relying on data as much as you are, being able to sort of probe their networks or...
Yes. When we think about cyber capabilities, of course, the first things we identify to be mandatory is to have the protection of our own assets, the protection of our data, the protection of our information services. But we have to go further. The enemy has also an information system, a command and control system. Why not trying to have actions on the enemy information system? You know, it's possible to have an artillery fire on the enemy command post, but I can imagine that I would like also to have a virus in his information system, or to have an entry port in his database.
So just where we are today, do you think that we are, in terms of the common architectures, the common standards and protocols that industry and the military needs to develop for this to happen, has that reached a level of maturity yet?
We have reached quite an interesting level of maturity. I think what is very, very important is to understand that this digital transformation is to be conducted together, the industry and the users. Because we are simultaneously changing the technologies we are using, but also potentially changing the way the military are conducting the operations. So we have to tell them what is technically possible, and they have to tell us what is military acceptable.
And I guess the other thing that does spring to mind is the idea of there needing to be a cultural change, I guess, within the way that the military does its business, or carries out operations, I should say. obviously as the younger generation comes through, where, you gave the analogy about you buy a CD, your children buy cloud-based music, and they don't care where it's stored as long as they can listen to it. We are seeing that cultural change, I guess, happening already today.
Yes, I think that there's a potential big change, big revolution in the way military operations are conducted, and especially in command and control concerns. And I think the new generation, they were born with computers, and they are ready to accept these changes in the way they are considering the manner they will conduct operations. They will decide, they will rely on information coming from digitized environment.
So we know that we've reported a lot on the fact that the UK, the US have been doing a lot of work on this type of technologies.
As far as I know, yes.
The common vehicle architectures, for example. Here in France, it's a lot of the work is based on, I guess, the Scorpion program. Will that be the program that sort of drives this into reality?
Yes, of course it is. We've been buying vehicles, platforms for years and years, only thinking about the gun, the wheels, the engine. And now we realize that if for the next generation, we must at first think it as a global system, and we need to have a reflection on the way it will work all together with information systems, communication means, and sensors, so that to have this collaborative efficiency coming from the way it has all been developed in an interoperability purpose.
And just finally, I guess, any sort of closing thoughts about the direction of this concept?
Yes, a closing thought. I would say, as a former officer, my main concern, my main purpose is to make sure that on the ground, in face of the enemy, I keep a tactical advantage from my technologies being better than his. And I think in the future, the best way to make sure that I have this gap is to work on information technologies and on digital transformation.
General, fascinating stuff. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So welcome to this week's Industry Voice segment. This is a part of the show that's brought to you in partnership with our sponsor, Namo. I'm Tony Skinner, VP of Content here at Shephard Media, and I'm joined by Andre Land, who is the SVP of Communications for Namo. Good afternoon, Andre.
Good afternoon, Tony.
So just to set the scene a little bit last week, your company Namo signed a 4-year framework agreement with the Norwegian Armed Forces for the long-term supply of ammunition. I mean, this seems like a good opportunity to talk about some of these civil-military cooperation sort of framework agreements. And I know that it's a subject sort of close to your heart, given that, you studied trends and developments in military acquisition, when you did your studies at King's, a couple of years ago now.
More years than I care to admit, yes.
So, I mean, if we were to kind of look at the sort of wider trends here, how are you sort of seeing things develop?
What I think is interesting is when I looked at these civil military cooperation 10, 15 years ago, there was a very different focus on how the deals were set up and what was the primary motivation for the deals compared to what we're seeing today. 10, 15 years ago, in my opinion, many of the deals where governments and industry were seeking some sort of long-term partnerships were motivated primarily by cost. So they want to make sure that governments avoided a lot of the capital investments, and they were able to farm out the day-to-day operations of large sections of their operations to a private company. What I'm seeing today is more of the motivation is shifting more towards giving each other predictability, in the sense that there's a mutual recognition that these things take a lot of time to get in place, whether or not it's logistics or it's communications or it's ammunition in our case. It's not something you just place an order this week and expect it to have a delivery next week. In most cases, that will not just not happen in this day and age.
Sure.
So it's more about getting these agreements in place that allows both industry and governments within these very critical sectors to know what to expect of each other and to be able to plan more long-term and more rationally in order to meet what really is common objectives.
Which I guess that in itself creates potentially its own problem if national governments are kind of locking down their domestic champions to ensure predictability of supply, on a European level, on a Western kind of coalition level, that could create problems if in terms of the international, kind of transfer of equipment.
Well, yeah, and not just equipment, but also where do the raw materials come from? There are a lot of subcomponents that are being produced in other countries, etc. And where I think this trend needs to be accompanied by as I always say, even more international cooperation. Because if a internationalized industry with a international supply chain begins being blocked down by national governments, then of course that's not going to work. In some cases, there's just a couple of sources across Europe or across the Western world for certain raw materials and components. And we have to have these understandings. What are we going to do in these cases? If we have a crisis, that's not unlikely. That's going to affect many of us at the same time. So where do the raw materials go? Who's going to be prioritized? How is this going to affect delivery times? I think these sort of state-to-state agreements need to come in place where they actually start looking at these issues and agreeing what to do. But for industry's sake, I think we also need to take a little bit of initiative here and start talking to the various national governments we work with, start talking to each other, start looking at our supply chain, start thinking about, okay, how are we going to work and serve our customers and the soldiers and sailors and airmen that rely on us in any kind of situation? What will be our role when it comes down to it? What terms will we have and so on? And also think that just in a peacetime environment, it makes a lot more sense. Just make sure that we talk together and organize our resources and think long term and allow us to plan better as well. When we start looking at delivery times on certain raw materials that exceed a year or two, then I don't think that year on year, a simple procurement really is the most rational way to go. It doesn't allow us to deliver as efficiently as we've liked. And it means that our customers can't really rely on when they're going to get the deliveries either. So I think it's in both industry and government's mutual interest that we find these long-term partnerships and agreements and really exploit their potential, because that really helps us both do what we're here for.
And I guess Norway granting Finland access, to the agreement that Nammo signed is a good example of that, I guess, that they're able to access the ammunition on Norway's terms.
Yep. And we already have a separate agreement between Nammo and Finland. But now, through this one, it means that Finland, and that's on the back of a Norwegian-Finnish agreement that exists like on a bilateral level between the governments. And that's a good example of how I believe this needs to be resolved. We need to understand that we can't just have one country, one agreement. This needs to happen on a more international basis. And I think some of the structures that we have in place here, we have the NATO Support and Procurement Agency that is doing some joint procurement on behalf of member states. But structures like that should really come more into play in order to find a common security supply structure for Europe. Because industry, we really want to work on a long term. We want to have predictability as well. We want to be able to deliver efficiently. As ammunition production, for instance, gets more and more complex, we need to invest in the right tools and machines. We need to make sure we have the trained staff in place. They don't really grow on trees. These guys have to be trained specifically and maybe for years before they're qualified. So that's not something that can be just scaled up and down on a moment's notice. This needs much more predictability than maybe we've had so far.
Sure. And I guess, baked into all that is obviously the cost advantages that also come from a long-term kind of multi-year agreement. So
yeah, of course.
And everybody's a winner, I guess, at that point.
In my opinion, everyone's a winner in that. And as long as we make sure that this doesn't end up being like just locking down a market or a customer for just one company for eternity, at which point we're really not developing this into the kind of market it should be. But where we have still a healthy level of competition, where we still have to defend our precision, then I think this could be very healthy for the overall market.
Excellent. Andre, we're out of time this week. Thanks again thanks as usual for your insight.
Thank you.
And we'll speak again next week.
Will do.
This episode of Shephard's Weekly Defence Podcast was brought to you by our sponsor, Nammo. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please head over to shepherdmedia.com to access all our news stories and subscriber content. We'd love to hear what you thought of the podcast, so please do subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes or other podcasting platforms. Thanks for listening.